JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a unique series. Yes, it's unique because of the weirdness, the references, the sheer grip it has on those who watch it, and the beautiful, kissable lips of every character Araki draws. I mean, just look at those suckers. Never mind, anyway. While all of those things make JoJo's an entertaining show that makes me smile and clap my hands like a circus chimp, what intrigues me most is how the series improves upon itself with every part. From making an interesting protagonist, to remaking the whole power system and format of the show, to scaling down the stakes and letting our JoJo take a variable back seat, Hirohiko Araki always finds something within his own stories that can be improved. As much as it can be funny to point at JoJo's and say every part is the same with a different colour palette or location, the fact of the matter is, things improve with every part. I'm not saying everything improves, and some things in part 1, for example, are done better than in parts 2 and beyond, but that's what makes this show so damn good. There's a part, a JoJo, a JoBro, and a villain out there for everyone. And today I'd like to talk a bit about the newest of these to make it to the big screen, and how Jolyne Kujo's introduction in the first 12 episodes of part 6 is some of Araki's strongest character work. JoJo's is a series that often relies on the strength of its protagonists. Given that each part has its own JoJo, they must all stand out from their predecessors while being attached to them. For Joseph, this was easy, as his wacky personality and ability to fight below the belt made him a stark contrast to Jonathan's righteous gentleman. Jotaro again was given a harsh, delinquent persona, which diverted from Joseph's caring attitude. By the time you reach part 6 though, few would have blamed Araki if his protagonist ran slightly out of steam. Hell, people are still torn over whether Giorno is a good JoJo, so for Jolyne the pressure was really on. Especially considering she's the first femoid on the team. She could have crashed and burned. Another example of anime creating nothing more than a male fantasy, or Jolyne could have been a carbon copy of her dad. Yet she's my favourite part of Stone Ocean so far, and I think that's pretty deserved. What I like about Jolyne's introduction is the freshness of it, and we see that from minute 1 when we're shown that we will watch Jolyne grow throughout this part. This is something fairly new for JoJo's, as we're often shown our protagonist at their peak, where they already know who they are and the extent of their abilities. We usually don't have the time to watch them grow, besides from maybe Joseph's training montage and Jonathan's in parts 1 and 2. But in terms of their character arcs, they often feel minimal. If you want to see what I mean, look at Giorno's entrance. Even at 15, he's mastered the use of his stand and has established who he is as a person and what his major goal is. At 15, I could barely convince myself to get a shower, let alone declare I was going to be a gank star and beat the hell out of a 21-year-old. The strength of Jolyne's introduction, I think, is that although she's fairly solidified in who she is as a person, the novelty of a prison environment and the addition of her stand means that we get to see her grow into these new things. Take her first fight with Gwess, and you'll see what I mean, and the difference between Jolyne and her predecessors. Where usually we expect a fight, the situation with Gwess only turns physical towards the end of the episode, while the rest of it is spent with Jolyne entirely at Gwess's whim. If we're taking the precedent set in part 5 and part 3, this is where we'd expect a fight right from the get-go, and this fight to involve the eventual JoBro, turning them from the side of evil with many, many punches to the face. Even in part 4, Josuke fights Okuyasu in his second fight of the series, so Jolyne is breaking multiple rules set since part 3 in her fight with Gwess. Gwess doesn't join the squad and is left as a creepy weirdo in a cell. Moreover, the fight isn't really a fight, and is more of a case of Jolyne figuring out she has powers and where the charm her dad left her is gone. In this episode then, Jolyne shows how different she is from other JoJo's in how she acts in prison and against Gwess. As Jolyne tucks herself into a rat costume and fails to assert her dominance around her fellow inmates, we see her with an initial lack of confidence. She's not as immediately brutish as her father, nor is she outwardly righteous like Jonathan. She's not a pre-established character. We don't know too much about her, and therefore we will learn these things throughout the series. Though she's one of the oldest JoJo's, we can see from her dependence on her mum and Romeo that she has been restricted from growing into herself, and that Green Dolphin Prison is where she is forced to do just that, and gain some independence. As was the case with Jotaro then, being locked up is almost a good thing for Jolyne. In prison and through her stand, she realises how strong she is, and develops beyond the need to hear her mum's voice. Again, looking at end of the Gwess fight, Jolyne has no qualm with beating her enemies to a pulp, and once she has the upper hand, it's clear to see the Jotaro within her. As her fights grow more serious, Jolyne grows in her ability and confidence at a rapid pace, her power being the use of strings as a strength too, as without the ability to stop time, create life, or heal people, Jolyne must think beyond an overpowered ability, and use her mind as well as her strengths. Both her growth as a person and the interesting ability of her stand means we spend more time with Jolyne, letting the JoJo once again become front and centre in the story. Unlike part 5, where the story is as much Bruno's as it is Giorno's, part 6 is clearly Jolyne's story, and there's nothing wrong with that. Returning to her fights though, another thing that sets part 6 apart is how few fights we've gotten in 12 episodes, which has made the show seem less repetitive and more focused on its main story. Placement of stand users, their connection to the villain, and everything about them makes sense. And so far we haven't had to suspend our disbelief like in part 3, where we kind of wonder how a baby came under Dio's employ. We don't even see Jolyne fight Hermes in these first 12 episodes. Instead they are drawn to each other not by wanting to fight, but by Hermes' curiosity in the bizarre things going on around Jolyne. The lack of the Monster of the Week style fights gives the fights that do appear more weight and meaning. Each of them feels like a continuation of the plot, and not just a reason to delay the inevitable fight between our protagonist and antagonist. While this is a point more on the part as a whole, I think this lets us like Jolyne a bit more with these well-written fights. We watch her grow physically and mentally through these fights, though it doesn't feel like Jolyne has to be the one to win every fight like in part 3, or that she's given more focus than she deserves. And I mean, linking back to part 3 again, Jolyne's story feels like we're back on the path set by Jonathan and Dio way back, even in part 1 actually. Though parts 4 and 5 are affected by Dio's actions, they're stories that don't build directly with what's happened. They're more spin-offs than sequels, and they're their own stories, concise and complete in the realms of Morio and Italy. Part 6 though, is the direct continuation of part 3's story, even though it takes place over 20 years after Jotaro punches Dio so hard he explodes. Jolyne is also our direct, legitimate successor, the child of Jotaro that takes up his legacy while fighting the person who's taken over Dio's legacy. The stakes are raised to the heights of the Joestar versus Brando bloodlines once more. It feels like, again, we're picking up the story that started this wacky anime, and Jolyne's a big part of that. To see her mix of Jotaro's anger and Joseph's thinking and trickery, she establishes herself as a Joestar that stands out, even while being influenced by her father and great-grandfather. With part 6 and Jolyne's introduction, though there are many things that are new, there's also that feeling of comfort when you see the continuation of a story you've loved so much. The new stuff though, well that's why I think Jolyne's introduction, and I believe what we get in 12 episodes of part 6 are so strong. I won't reiterate what I've said about Jolyne's stand and personality, but I think we haven't touched on too much is that Jolyne is a she. The first female protagonist in JoJo, and oh boy could this have gone wrong. I think, as an unqualified male, that Araki usually writes women well. There's the odd scene of Lisa in the tub, and Mariah's you-know-what. We've got to remember that this was the 80s, and these scenes end up centering around Joseph and are used more for comedic effect, one way or another. We won't talk about the paedophile later. Let's just push that way back to one side. But yeah, that bit's bad. I don't want to see a 13-year-old girl with a towel around her waist, and I'm sure you don't either. Something that I remember often though, is something Araki states when he writes characters, and that he never really regards their gender. And this is clear to see whether you look at the men or women in JoJo's. Never before have I seen a series that so easily blends femininity with masculinity. With the posing, outfits, and aforementioned gorgeous mouths, traditional masculinity is thrown out of the window to celebrate the eccentric and self-expression of the characters. While the men aren't men, they are characters, and the same reflects on Jolyne. Apart from having great design, she stands out for more than just being a woman. She isn't the female JoJo, but instead she's the JoJo of part 6. From minute 1, Araki ensures the anime community won't see her as anything else, and I think this just adds to the main point of Jolyne being such a refreshing part of part 6, which makes me like it so much. So, we're 12 episodes into part 6 now. Well, unless you're a weekly viewing incel who didn't just binge the series twice as soon as it came out. We've seen FF's appearance, a few fights, and a slice of Poochie's backstory. And even with all that, I think it's Jolyne that's the strongest element of the part so far. Everything from the way she approaches fighting, how she quickly builds the relationships with other characters around her, to her standability and motivation, is keeping me interested. Like the woman-shaped ball of yarn that is her stand, I've no doubt we'll see Jolyne unravel like that one Tokyo Ghoul opening as we see more of her as the series goes on. There may be weaker elements to part 6, I don't know. I can't evaluate the whole part without seeing it. But so long as Jolyne stays the same, she's a JoJo that can carry any part to success. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please do let me know in any way that you can. I've been Bathtub Running, and I hope I'll see you again soon.